Hello, and welcome to today's lesson. I hope you've learned about the trade balance in the previous non-plasma lesson. The trade balance is defined as the difference between the value of exports of goods and services to that of the value of imports. Remember that if value of exports is greater than value of imports, it's called trade surplus. Whereas, if value of imports is greater than value of exports, it's called trade deficit. Students, you must have also noted that Ethiopia has been facing high amount of trade deficit for many years. We have also discussed current account balance. Current account balance includes the trade account, the service account, and the transfer account. The only component of foreign trade in Ethiopia that often registered a positive balance of payment is the services account. However, the current account balance of Ethiopia often remains in deficit despite substantial private transfer inflow and a small but increasing net receipt from services. Students, in today's lesson, we will discuss the capital account balance and the national debt service and performance. We will start our lesson by explaining what capital account balance means. Capital account balance covers transactions in financial assets and liabilities. It differs from the current account transactions in that it necessarily involves domestic residents either acquiring or conceding claims on foreign residents. Hence, it deals with changes in the levels of claims on foreign residents. Let's now consider the trend of current account and capital account balance using the data from some selected years. As you can see from this table, which is available in your textbook, the value of exports is less than value of imports for all the years, implying a negative trade balance or a trade deficit. Except for 1992-93, the capital account exhibits a positive balance. This high surplus of capital account balance reflects the higher official long-term capital inflows and a modest increase in estimated inflow of foreign direct investment. Similarly, net services and private transfers depict a positive balance. Students, the data on the table you just saw has been converted to a graph form so that you'll be able to see the trends. Before I describe the trends, I want you to watch the following graph carefully and describe what you observe. Discuss in groups before you describe the graph. Here's the graph. I hope you've enjoyed reading and describing the graph. Now, watch carefully as I describe the magnitudes and trends. In this graph, the lower line depicts the trends in trade balance. As it is below the x-axis, it is obviously negative for all the years between 1992, 93, and 2008-9. This implies not only a trade deficit, but also an increasing trend in the trade deficit. However, the capital account was positive and shows a positive trend. Due to large magnitude and increasing trade deficit, the current account also exhibits a growing deficit. In this line graph, the upper line represents private transfers, while the lower line represents net services. Net services and private transfers depict a positive balance and an increasing trend in all years. I hope the distinction between current account and capital account is clear to you. Now, jot down the difference between current account and capital account, and also explain the difference to the students sitting next to you. I hope you've clearly distinguished between current account and capital account. The basic difference between the two is that while the current account reflects a nation's net income, the capital account reflects net change in national ownership of assets. That is, surplus in current account balance shows a nation is obtaining net earnings. The earnings could be from net export, net services, or net transfers. A deficit in current account implies just the opposite. A surplus in capital account balance depicts that money is flowing into the country. The flow of money could be as a result of borrowings or sales of assets rather than earnings. A deficit in capital account implies just the opposite. I am sure by now you have clearly understood the difference between current account and capital account. Let's now move on to the next point, that is, national debt. National debt is an accumulation of annual loans entered between the Ethiopian government and creditor nations and lending institutions. National debt can be domestic or external, or both. Domestic debt is the accumulation of annual loans that the government borrows from domestic financial institutions, whereas external debt refers to the accumulation of annual loans that the government borrows from international financial markets. Most countries face shortages to finance all their required government investments or expenditures. As a result, it is quite normal for countries to use either domestic or external or both kinds of loans. Students, can you think of the limitations of using excessive domestic or external government borrowings? In groups, discuss the problems that arise as a result of excessive domestic or external government borrowings. Have you discussed the problems? That's great. Let me explain to you the main problems that arise as a result of excessive domestic or external government borrowings. Excessive domestic government borrowing may reduce borrowings and spending by the private sector. This is called crowding out effect. When there is an excessive external government borrowing, it will generate high debt service obligation that will constrain future economic policy and growth. As long as the foreign debt burden is very large, foreign borrowing allows a country to invest and consume beyond the limit of current domestic production. Students, do you know what debt servicing burden means? Well, the debt servicing burden is the amount of foreign exchange required to pay the external debt and the interest on the debt. Students, let's now see the data of foreign stock of external debt of Ethiopia since 1991-92. As you can see from the table, the total external debt more or less increases up to 1998-9. It increased from 8 billion and 790 million USD in 1991-92 to 10 billion and 154 million USD in 1998-99. Subsequently, it dropped significantly down to about 2 billion 300 million USD in 2007-8, though it increased again to 3 billion 305 million USD in 2008-9. Students, you should remember one important point here. Even if the total external debt decreases on average, the debt serving burden may not decline. This happens because export earnings are less than what the country should pay for imports, and this creates debt accumulation. This implies that debt accumulation and repayment may retard economic growth. Some debt theories hold that huge accumulation of external or foreign debt has a negative impact on the level of a nation's economic growth. One of the obvious reasons is that it drains the country's foreign exchange reserves through the debt servicing payments to the creditors. Before I wind up today's lesson, let me summarize the main points. In our lesson today, we have discussed the capital account balance and national debt service. We have seen that while the current account reflects a nation's net income, the capital account reflects net change in national ownership of assets. We have also seen that national debt is an accumulation of annual loans borrowed by the government from domestic or external sources, or both. Finally, we saw that high government borrowing from domestic sources may crowd out private borrowing and investment, and huge accumulation of foreign debt may retard economic growth. Well, students, that is all we have time for. In the next non-plasma lesson, you will discuss more about the capital account balance. So see you next time in another program. Until then, goodbye, teacher. Goodbye, students.